about the literature for children and young adults. And as you know, I prepared 4 topics to discussion. And now we can talk, but I think that after our seminar, we should everyone should write down some remarks. Yes, to these 4 topics, and we can put it together, and it can be some kind of base, I think, for us to go forward. And the first question is, how did it happen that the Holocaust literature for children was distinguished within the literatures in your countries? What does its development look like from the perspective of the history of literature and from literary history perspective? So, because as you remember, when I was reading my text, I think about this literature for children in a long perspective. So first we had the text of when the children weren't the main characters, then we had diaries, then we had the text of children of the Holocaust, then we have the text of women narratives, and in the end, at the start of the 21st century, we have the books for children and what it looks like in your countries.
Okay, I feel like that's Arabic.
Okay, I think it's a different type of children literature, because from the beginning it is not only educational literature, but for most it's political literature, because the state of Israel is established after the Holocaust as a result. The rationale, the national rationale is that Israel is built out of the Holocaust survivors. So it's different from its start, and Shaimuddin was supposed to be a recent paper where he shows the difference in time. At first, Hebrew children literature was testimonial, diaries, autobiographies, and was very violent. And in the 70s, it started to be different. At first, narrative, softer narrative, including violence and death, but soften, not always with happy ending. And from the 90s, it started to be engaged with the literature system norms, and everything was with happy ending, even if it had to be changed. The history had to be changed in case that, for example, autobiographies, when the protagonists lost their parents, the happy ending was that they found their parents. So that is the Hebrew children literature in 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? Marina.
So with the Russian case, this is more complicated. First of all, like in Poland, it was not recognized, and socialist Poland, I mean, it was not recognized that Jews create a separate group. No, Jewish suffering was everyone's suffering. Jewish children were everyone's children. So it was no specific attention paid. Can we, this is like no chance to fix the echo?
Yes.
Close our mic.
Yes.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was like no chance to even start to talk about Jewish experience, Jewish children's experience. So, and in the 1960s, it was pretty big change in general in the development of Russian literature. So we had a period that was called the THAW, T-H-A-W, because it was semi-liberal reforms of the Khrushchev government, and at this moment, in the 1960s, to be exact, 1963, so it was the first publication by Holocaust survivor, Maria Volnikaite, Masha Volnikaite, this is how she goes. So, and she was talking about her experience in a ghetto in Lithuania. So, and the introduction to this experience, to this, life writing, I would say, I mean, because she was talking about, she didn't have a very specific structure, so was written by a very famous person, a very famous writer, and prominent functionary, I would say, literary functionary. So Ilan Book, who is one of the authors, supposed to be one of the authors of the Black Book. So, and that was for the first time when the child's memoir and the experience was recognized as the Jewish experience, although not discussed in those terms. So the title of her memoir is "Я хочу рассказать," I would like to tell, or I like to tell my story. So that was pretty much the author, who was talking about this type of experience. And at that time, Soviet Union consists out of all these 15 republics, and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and specifically Ukraine, and Belarus, or Belarusia at that time, they were part of the Soviet discourse, and they were part of the Soviet political system and Soviet discourse. Therefore, this memoir was censored in many different ways, but like I said, for the first time, the topic was there. What is happening, and still remains not obligatory, but suggested reading for the children of high school age. So what happened after that, not much. When we are talking about what is going on today, it is a pretty sad picture because there are no Russian authors who are writing about Holocaust for children in Russia, in Russian Federation. Their case became even easier because right now Ukraine, as you probably know, is not, doesn't have the best experience or the best relationship with Russia today, and now it is over there. This is not one of Russia. So this is not the Russian experience that is counted into the Holocaust history. With Belarus is a little bit different because now this is the big friendship. So, but mainly the sort of an excuse not to write about it is that, everything what happened, the majority of concentration camps and ghettos were outside of Russian Federation today. So what is happening? What is legitimized at this point? Translations. Orlov is translated into Russian. Shigetsky is translated into both, into Russian and Ukrainian. There are recent translations. And I can present it with the whole list of works of children's literature that were translated recently in the last 10 years from all possible languages into Russian and published, but published by small publishing houses in small numbers. The books are very expensive. The leader is Samarkand. I hope that at some point when we will reach the different stage of this project, I will interview the editor-in-chief of Samarkand and ask her about how she chooses her books. So, again, what is happening, these books are not the mainstream. They are, and people who choose those books are parents. And we're facing, as scholars, again, the situation where we have to think about commercial market, we have to think about educational level of parents. I mean, are they interested in bringing this type of knowledge? And I honestly feel comfortable right now because I have a chance to read those books in their original language, so mostly. So, except Hebrew, I mean, my Hebrew is not that strong, so, but at least I understand choices behind the books. But I cannot, like I said, what is happening right now, so I think Samarkand is, well, how do you translate it? It's not the bicycle, but the scooter. Yeah. So, and another publishing house, another press is Pink Giraffe. So, Rozovый Giraffe. So, those, which is also, I mean, the whole title gives you an idea of how liberal the press is. But again, the books are published in low quantities with beautiful illustrations, but you cannot find Russian authors among those writers. And I hope I have couple of more months, you know, preparing the Russian part to be able to talk to you about how the situation is changing.
Thank you, Marina. Sławek?
Advocem to Marina.
Okay.
I would like to know, it does mean that Russian writers are completely not interested in the subject of Holocaust, it means. And the second question is connected with the readers. If the readers are interested in this subject, and for instance, can we find any reviews of this kind of literature in Russian magazines or books? Thank you.
Are you talking about children's literature, or are you talking about literature in general?
About children's literature, of course.
Children's literature. So actually, I wanted to talk to Chris about it. So yesterday I got an email from the leading journal of children's literature, Детские чтения, Children's Readings. It is based at the Institute of History of Russian Literature, Academic Institute in St. Petersburg. So, and I was contacted, I mean, I'm on their editorial board, but so I was contacted by one of the editors saying, hey, I mean, you are doing this, such an interesting, you are participating in such an interesting project, can you write about it? So I need to have your permission, guys, if I can prepare like a short statement and tell about the work of the group. So this is number one. Number two, yes, in this magazine, as well as the websites. One of the websites is led by a scholar Her name is Ekaterina Asonova in Moscow, so who published reviews of those books. It is, but they are single individuals who are critics, who are children's writers themselves, who are scholars, who single out those translations and write about them, but nobody writes about this phenomenon of a total lack of domestic authors. Why? Well, right now I think it's more and more about politics, because you have this national pride that and unity that is proclaimed by the Russian government, I almost said the Soviet government. So we are one people, we are one nation. This is pretty much what happened before the war, before World War II. So the stress is on this unity of all members of Russian Federation. Are we interested in this subject? A couple of years ago, it was a project led by the Russian writer Ilan University. She is a very interesting author, very well known in the West, and she sponsored the project that was called, I'm translating, well, the other. I think the best translation would be. So in her project, she started to invite young writers, predominantly this third generation right now. So she invited young writers to write about subjects that were taboo. And one of those subjects is Holocaust, but nothing happened because the project was closed. She published several books, but I mean under her under the auspices of this particular organization. Another situation that I believe also, in Roman, I mean, jump in at any moment. Another situation that I think also added to that is that the revival of the Jewish life in Russia in the last decade of the 20th century, the 1990s to 2000, 2010, 2005, I would say. So invited a lot of reminiscences, invited a lot of recollections, but they were all directed toward the grown-up reader, not toward a young reader. That was for adults, not for children. And then somehow this children block of literary works, since it didn't exist, I mean, got lost. So you can find recollections, you can talk about Russian Jewish literature, of course. I mean, one of those talks, I think Roman is participating in Moscow at the very prestigious publishing press, Claudia Smola, who is a scholar who lives and works in Germany, and she writes about Russian Jewish literature, contemporary Russian Jewish literature. But and she and I, some occasions, I mean, I was in Hamburg for a long time, so as a guest professor, and she and I talked about it, but nothing happened. So I mean, it didn't materialize in a project. I think that this contemporary situation in Russia, this idea that we are one people, we don't need to single out anyone, I mean, this is sort of a block to promote this literature. But I'm just happy that there are 3 publishing houses that are translating very actively.
If I may say, today, as Marina said, and she's right, the literature about Holocaust in Russian written mostly in Israel. This is Russian literature, it's written in Israel, And this is quite intense.
Also for children?
For adults, not for children. That's why I'm silencing for now and waiting for the next discussion about adult literature. I don't know about children or young literature in Russian, in Israel today, about Holocaust. Although there are some motives here and now in many texts, yes, we can find. But I don't know if I can just define it as Holocaust literature. Maybe what the main subject of Russian literature for many decades now, and Marina, maybe you agree with me, is not the camp, but the ghetto. It's ghetto literature. So about ghetto, also there is those memoirs of people that are published these days about ghetto, when they were children in the ghetto. You can, you can know if it's authentic memoirs, and in which extent this is fictionalized. You don't know, but children, now adults, recall their impressions of from ghetto. I don't know to what extent it may be called Holocaust literature, because every time it stops where the death happens, where the camp happens, it's also happening in Marina.
What?
Litovsky, Grigori Kanovich.
Kanovich.
Also in Kanovich. But you don't enter the camp. You don't know what's going on there. You only witnessing the briefing, the around. You're listening. You hear what's going on. You are not in the.
But you are talking about literature for adults still.
Yes.
Of course, yeah.
That's interesting because in Polish literature, as I said yesterday, we have the same situation, so we don't go to the camp.
If I have a moment, oh God, I hear myself again. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I tried. Couple of years. Well, first of all, think about the school history books. I mean, asking about an issue in Russia. School history books do mention Holocaust in the context of World War II. It was in, as Nina and I yesterday talked about it, World War II in Russian context is not World War II. And it didn't start when it started. It started in 1941. It is the Great Patriotic War. So, I mean, this is totally separated from, well, I shouldn't say totally, but mainly separated from this particular group of texts. So, in the history book, Holocaust is mentioned as part of general story of the war. And of course, the war today is about heroic actions, about young pioneers who were heroes. I mean, I have written about it a lot. So, but what is also interesting, what happened, that was a couple of years ago. I don't want to lie. I think it was 2003, 4. Two twin sisters from a Russian province, so not from Moscow. So they came, they were students in Moscow. And of course, life is complicated and very expensive. So they were participating either in the public or as participants in all possible funny type competitions, from who is dancing to who is eating pizza faster. So, two twin sisters, and at some point in one of those competitions, they were asked a question. It was like gender division, boys, girls, and the boys were asking questions. And the group of smart boys asked them about Holocaust. What is Holocaust? And one sister, and it is recorded, one sister, she was looking at them and said, you know, I don't know. So they are 20, 21 at that time. So, no, I don't know. And the other one said, Holocaust, Holocaust. I think it's a paste for wallpaper. So, university students, well, there were students at technical university, but, you know, university students graduated from high school, so totally, absolutely ignorant about what is Holocaust, not even recognizing the word. And I believe that one of the producers of the show was so shocked that they totally paid the trip of those two sisters to the Auschwitz. They were taken to Auschwitz, and the trip was totally paid for, and you could see this amazing transformation. It was really sincere, you know. I was watching it because they created like a small film about it, and I was watching it and I was thinking, my God, because that for the first time it was a huge discussion, but where? Was it the government discussion? Was it the discussion of educational structures, you know, Russia? No, it was not. It was on the internet. But the pressure was such, so they organized the trip, this TV station organized the trip of the sisters, and you could see how they're sitting in on a train, you know, how they're traveling to Poland and how they're counting euros that they have, because it was the first time they saw euros, and what they are planning, what they're going to buy using those euros. And then you see how slowly, and it was recorded in a most beautiful way, with no commentary, but you as a viewer could see how their attitude was changing. And one of them burst into tears, screaming, you know, after the visit to Auschwitz, why? Why you didn't tell us that at school? And the history teacher at that school was interviewed, and she was asked why, and she opened the textbook, and she showed that Holocaust is mentioned only in the part of in the experience of World War II. Great Patriotic War. That was it. So it is given. For Russia it was an incredible shock, I think, and it was called. The whole documentary was called Holocaust paste for the paste for the wallpaper. This is the stage.
Thank you, Marina. Tina, I think you want to say something. We can hear you. Nina, we can hear you.
We cannot hear you, dear.
Nina, תורידי את המיקרופון. תורידי אותו.
She has the microphone. Yeah.
Comparatively to what any
I think there is a problem with Nina's microphone because
like excellent, you know?
Now it's on. It's
Uh-huh.
it's on. Okay. May I ask you something, Karina?
Yeah.
I wonder whether the students, the engineers, which I assume,
We can hear you.
we can hear you, Nina.
No.
Oh,
Well, she's asking about the engineering. Engineering students. Mhm.
it's okay.
I hear you.
Wydaje się, ona włączyła drugą kamerę. Takie słuchawki.
a dlaczego
It's
one
disappeared.
słyszą, a my nie?
You can write the question down and read it.
Bo mają lepszy słuch.
Pójdźcie do Czech.
No, Nina is not.
Nina, please turn off and your microphone, your headphones, and maybe turn it on one more time because we didn't hear you and that's a problem.
Slavik, you asked why the Russian writers don't write about Holocaust. The question is why they should. Because there is not part of their experience,
No, it's the same.
of their memory.
Try to pose your question because I think I hear you, so I'll write it down.
It wasn't part of
No, it's not.
the
It's what exactly?
Okay.
Why about something that they know? I
But
suppose.
Nina, you have to turn off your microphone because we hear some kind of noises.
My place is completely silent here. Nobody here, and not yourself. So everything is, you know. You can't, I know the big window, you can see the traffic, you know. So it's not for my place.
Nina,
We can hear you.
we can hear you. Please switch off your microphone because we don't hear anything.
Only noises.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
Oh, wait till we come to Israel.
No, write it in the chat.
Okay. Marina, do you hear what Nina was asking us?
she was, well, I hear at the beginning and then it disappeared, and yeah, it was a curiosity question, I guess, yeah.
Okay, so maybe now we try to say something about Dutch literature. So maybe you should try now about this, what happened there.
We already had a seminar on this.
There is a little research on children's literature in the 20th century. So, but the children's literature itself was dominated after the Second World War by the diary of Anne Frank, and then in the 80s. The survivors started to write about their experiences, and also for children. And the well-known name on this kind of children's books is Ida Voss. And then, but for other children's books are not particularly about the Holocaust. There are books about Second World War, and these are adventurous books mostly. And in the 90s, the image of the rights one and the unrights one changes. So the German are not only the bad guys, and the Dutch people are not only the good guys. I don't know if this was the same in Flemish literature, because there are no books or hardly ever books written about Holocaust in Flemish children's literature in the 20th century, because the collaboration was the main theme, and in the 90s they start to write openly about collaboration, but the Holocaust is not the issue yet in Flemish children's literature. And in Dutch children's literature in the 90s, books about Holocaust start to be published, and the real explosion of Holocaust children's books is the 21st century. So. There are books about Second World War where the theme of hiding Jews is an issue, but it's not the main theme.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe you would like to... this is only in general, because just as I said, this theme is not explored, not researched in the 20th century, especially for children's literature, because in the literature for adults you have more research, but children's literature you don't. And in the beginning of the 21st century there was a researcher, Lubelski, and she started to write her thesis, but she stopped, unfortunately, and there is only a few texts of her. So you have to practically read all the books and do it yourself.
But the 21st century is the turning point.
Yeah.
Just like in Polish literature.
Yes, something like that.
And in Israel is the same?
I don't agree. Sorry.
About
No.
children's literature?
No,
And it's the same.
about the 21st century being a turning point.
No, turning point.
But this point
Yeah.
in Hebrew literature is the 90s. Before
90s.
the
Okay,
21st century.
so earlier than here in Poland. But why Bettina can't agree with?
Well, let's see.
Well, yeah, it's as far as I can see, there was not a huge wave of new children's books in the 21st century. It's sort of continuing
Okay.
from the mid-80s, I would say. So I agree with the survivors starting
Testimonies.
to tell, well, testimonies for children's books.
Yes, but
For so
reworking of the.
and I think it's special for the Dutch situation of children's literature on Holocaust. That the main focus point is the hiding histories.
Hiding, okay.
Yeah, and from both sides. So it's the main character is a Jewish child, or is a non-Jewish child helping
This-
or
okay.
observing how hiding takes place.
So, because in Poland we have some kind of surplus of text, or maybe the strong wave in the beginning of 21st century, and nothing before.
But in Dutch literature, 90s is the turning point, and it starts in the literature for adults, because there is now. So this is the point that there is revision of the founding myth, and so the Dutch people are not only the good guys who were only helping, and so. And then you have the same thing in the children's literature in the 90s as well. But I still argue that there is much more books in the 21st century than in this let's say 10 or 15 years of the end of 20th century.
Okay.
But there's also the aspect of the reception of books. So I remember in Dutch, de kinderen van het achtste woud.
That's
from the
first
mid-80s. It's children. It's in translation, the children of the eighth forest, and it's about hiding in a forest, which was rare in Dutch history. But it was loaded with prizes, and it was reprinted I don't know how many times, and it is we consider it a classic in children's literature. So that aspect, it's not only the production, it's also the reception that plays a role.
We don't have that kind of classics in children's literature. Sarah, do you want to say something about the situation in the US? How it happened that the literature about Holocaust for children appeared?
As far as I know, it's always been present, since about the 1970s, but it definitely has been more prolific in the past 20 years, particularly the trend. There are a lot of stories about hiding. There are stories about the ghettos. There are a lot of stories about intergenerational storytelling for young people. So where a grandparent survived, and there's a framed story of the grandparent talking to their grandchild about their experience. So again, it provides that distancing because we know that they survived.
But you say that the beginning was in 1970s, yes?
There started to be Holocaust literature for young people in the 70s, but I would say it's become more prolific in the 90s as well.
Okay. But can we say that in 21st century more books are published in US about Holocaust for children, or no?
Yes, definitely, and especially for like picture books and books for middle grade readers.
Okay, thank you. So it was a first question, but I think it's quite important to put it in some frame, yes, and say something about the similarities and differences between our countries. And the second question,
I think Tina's question is
okay.
Perhaps you should answer.
Tina, okay.
Not Nina, Marina.
Marina, please.
The chat, you have your private chat with Tina open?
My question for all, including Sarah, is about translation. I mean, what type of translation works started to appear in other languages? So, for example, Shigersky was translated into Russian. He went to Ukraine, to Lviv, to present his book and talk about it, and gave an interview. So, what is happening in Dutch literature? What is happening in Polish literature? So, what are the translations? What is the amount of translation in comparison to the national literature for children and young adults about Holocaust?
Into Hebrew, for example, the diaries, not only Anna Frank's, but Eva Herman also. The diaries were the first to be translated into Hebrew, but if we are talking about the 21st century, the main translated texts are picture books and early videos with many illustrations, with happy ending always. That are the translated, but in Hebrew they are the minority of the text.
Minority.
So in Polish books for children are translated for many languages. It depends on the book, but I think it's worth to say that some of them are translated on Chinese and Japanese. And I think this is a phenomenon because there are Polish language studies in China. And they're quite popular. So, of course, for many other languages like Spanish, like Portuguese, but it depends of book we are talking about. Depends. So we made with Sławek, we made this that kind of table in which we put these translations. Do you remember? When we were looking for English translations, we made also this set of...
Yeah, it was a supplement, yeah.
Yes, so it's a lot of it in Poland. And in Dutch literature, there are translations for other languages or not?
Anne Frank, of course. Anne Frank is translated in every language, I think. And then...
Well, we made a list of translations, just like you did, so I think perhaps Kat remembers best because she did most of the
I
work.
don't think there was only one line to be drawn from it. There were some translations into Russian, some into English, not really one language that's
But the most,
except of course.
the most translations are in German, because Germany is a very eager country to reset Dutch children's literature, and they translate like almost everything the last decades. But I suppose also in the past, in the 20th century, and if one book won the Jugendliteraturpreis, the chance was big that it will be translated also in other languages. So Germany was a kind of transit land for translations.
Okay.
Transfer.
So I think thanks to Marina, we have two other topics. First is the school teaching about Holocaust, because it's important. Even if we think about the knowledge of authors of this book, so how they should know a lot about Holocaust to write about Holocaust for children, I think. But in Poland, till the 90s, we didn't have good school teaching about Holocaust. So it's a kind of own lectures, own readings, and post-memory thing. So this is the first topic, school teaching about Holocaust, and the second one is translations. So how popular these works are abroad. And I don't know how much time do we have, but I want to ask you, because you say that the Hideout is the main place where the action of books in Dutch books taking place. Here in Poland we have ghetto, and is it the same in Israel? Erga?
It depends. Young adults literature is the ghetto, the partisans, the woods. Little for very young readers. It's almost always the home, not the parents' home, but local people's homes. Almost never, for the very young readers, it's almost never the child is left alone. For the more adult readers, it happens. So that is the reason I think that our differences between the pictures books for young readers and the young adult and adult literature.
Okay. And Sarah, I think in USA you have all places, yes, in kids. Okay.
If I may, so in the Russian literature, what was happening, so the attention was given to survival. And now I'm thinking about a very interesting phenomena. For example, the Diary of Anna Frank was translated in the 70s, so which was pretty early on. But immediately, it was another diary of a Russian girl who survived the 900 days of blockade in Leningrad, St. Petersburg back then, Leningrad. So, and sort of to level the experience. And of course, she was called our Anna Frank. So she was, I mean, but that was actually pretty popular. Tanya Savage, that was her diary. That sort of was a counter leveling of the subject. So, but what is interesting right now is, oh my God, I mean, I hate it. That the literature, that the literature of Great Terror started to appear with the stories of child survivors. First of all, it is closer, that was 1937, so, and those children are still alive. So I do have high hopes for Russian authors writing about Holocaust, because right now this subject is, the subject of suffering of children is not taboo anymore, so let us talk about it. And this is suffering. Children who were left alone to survive, children who overcame all the difficulties and are still full-fledged citizens of the country. So maybe this is hope. Maybe this is hope out there.
Okay, thank you. Guys, I think I would write it down, these questions, those topics, and I will send it to you after the seminar, so you can prepare your own vision of answers for these questions, and then it will be, as I say, it will be our base for the further discussions. Erga, please.
I have another question. If the reading, the Holocaust literature reading is mandatory or voluntary? Because in Israel, for example, it's a sort of mandatory. All schools, all educators must teach at certain level some text. So it's mandatory. Every child is a repertoire, sort of repertoire of Holocaust text. So I think it's a question. For me, at least, it's something that interests me if it's mandatory in other countries.
Sarah?
In the United States right now, teaching about the Holocaust is mandatory in 19 of the 50 states. And Oregon was the latest to pass legislation, and there are 2 states that are going to start requiring it beginning next school year. So I have been working with teachers to develop curriculum around children's and young adult literature for the K through 12 sector on how to teach it. But there's still a lot of push to make it mandatory in all 50 states, but right now we're at 19.
Thank you.
Here in Poland, we teachers have to, on the history lessons, have to teach about Holocaust, but on the Polish language lessons, it's not obligatory to read a book about Holocaust. So it depends. This is a kind of teacher's will, if the students...
I don't know, but I was really shocked when I discovered in the Polish book of my son fragments of Anna Frank diary.
Maybe in fragments in school books, but
yeah.
not as a
topic, mandatory topic. Okay.
And as a book on the reading list. You know, because there are 2 reading lists. One is obligatory and the second one is not obligatory. The teacher can choose.
So, but are we talking about literature or are we talking about the topic of Holocaust at school?
I think these are two different things.
Yes, but which are we discussing now?
Both of them.
Because
well, Holocaust is, in our case at least, it's something that comes up in the final year of high school, so to speak, because it's contemporary history. But it's different in literary classes, I would say. So I can imagine, I have a sister-in-law who teaches Dutch in the first years of middle school. And she used to teach, for instance, about Korczak. So this is definitely something that comes up within the language classes. But in history, it's only, let's say, in the final class of high school. But I would be inclined to focus on how it is integrated in courses related to literature,
Yes,
to reading,
yes, of
not
course.
to
This is the most
general history, because that would make it too complicated, I think.
Yeah.
Again, here, this question, Russian literature is some different case because, for example, again, Israeli literature in Russian. It falls between the chairs. So, in Russian, this is not the literature of Russian Federation. Yeah, this is the Israeli literature about Holocaust. But in Israel, Russian literature, which is part of the school programs, are Russian classics, like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. And the Russian Israeli literature is absolutely unknown for Israelis, Hebrew reading Israelis. So this is just something that we call the ghost, that no one sees, but it exists, and perhaps here in this circle we can somehow realize it and return it to life.
Okay. Thank you, guys. I think we can finish this part of discussion.
Well, if I may add something, because I remember us talking last time in February, for instance, about the characters and what kind of characters are depicted, boys, girls. So I think we should also look into issues of gender, age, religion, because I remember Sławek asking about, is there any kind of representation of Hasidic characters, for instance?
Not in Polish literature.
No, but that's something that could be.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's a general trend, so perhaps it's a case that's totally absent from all these books we're dealing with. So then it's a general trend. I also remember us talking about the role of the parents and whether, in terms of agency, whether they are passive or active. And so I think we should also look at issues of agency related to the child protagonists. But I'm not sure if that's something we should discuss right now, but that's something that came up last time, and I think it would be good to continue some of these discussions.
Yeah, for
It would be
example,
nice
the
to-
king as a helper. It was very interesting part of the discussion. If a child as a helper appears in this literature or another, and there were differences between the different languages here. This is the starting point for something very intriguing.
So in the Dutch case, for instance, you have this Dutch child taking up the role of helper, right? Whereas the Jewish child is hiding.
So it would be nice to get an inventory, to make an inventory of the various languages.
You want to do it right now, or we
No,
are...
no, written.
Okay.
And also I would like to say that in Polish literature it is a very important subject, double parents. Jewish parents and non-Jewish parents, Polish parents.
The second parents.
Second
Aryan, parents from Aryan side.
Yeah, and it is very interesting because it is connected with the mentality of the children, first of all, of them who survived. Who were my parents? Jewish parents or non-Jewish parents? And this is kind of schizophrenia in the protagonist.
Yes, it is, because they were rescued, but it was also kind of oppression for them. They have to learn Catholic prayers by heart and so on.
It's not only parents, but also, for example, monastery. Child in a monastery and without parents, the orphan in the monastery. Subject,
Yes, and it's quite interesting because I think in this Polish literature for kids, we don't have that kind of situation that kid is hiding with their parents.
With their parents?
With parents. In which book? Always we have only child, which is hiding with Polish family, but with parents,
I don't remember now.
Mhm.
But also, I would like to say about one thing, and we should think about it, that during the Holocaust, we can find it in the examples of this kind of literature. There is a very interesting subject of exchange positions. Children began to function as the parents of their parents. You understand that they prepare money, they look for money, they look for meals, etc. And it is also very interesting plot. What I can show it. I can see it in Polish literature, and for me it's very interesting if this kind of yes, there is also, for instance, in Hebrew literature or in Russian literature for children.
It's a preparation for Israel now, for Israeli seminar.
Well, you know what, for Israeli seminar or not, but I was sort of asking this question when when I was talking about two of my authors, self-hatred Jew as a child. You know, for example, Anita knows all the Catholic prayers, and she's always, for herself, she identifies Jewishness with verfluchte Juden, so cursed Jews. So the same actually is with Rafal in Shigelski's story. So when he's saying, I mean, I know all the prayers, I understand everything, so why should I be a Jew? So, and when they grow up, when they are adults, I mean, think about it. Anita doesn't have anything to do with Judaism. Excuse me. So, I mean, she is a citizen of the world, so let us put it nicely. But is this subject a legitimate subject for us to talk about, to see, to look? I understand that in Israeli literature it probably doesn't exist, but in any other literature, I mean, I don't want to be a Jew is a pretty strong statement for me. I mean, actually it bothers me very, very much, because after reading the book, so everything a child or young adult looking at the situation thinks, who wants to be Jewish?
Yeah,
It does exist. It does exist in Hebrew literature. It exists in Hebrew literature. You can find everything, and even this. For example, in Antwerpii, you'll find in Hebrew, for example, a girl who grows up and discovers that she's Jewish and she doesn't want it, and when at last she knows, and everyone knows that she's Jewish, she's been killed. Right? So maybe the Hebrew literature can be like
filling the gaps.
Like a paradigm, like something that has everything inside, and we can develop different connections to every other literature.
There is a very interesting book about this subject, Marina, in the Dutch literature, and the action takes place in orphanage of Janusz Korczak, and we have the book is by Caroline Stoffels, Moshe and Reizele, and Moshe is a Polish boy who even didn't know he was Jewish, and he is very upset that he became Jewish because of the war, and eventually he chooses to be Jewish, and he after the Second World War, but there is this subject of this identity is very strong motive in the book. But I don't know, because this is a Dutch book about Polish situation, but I should think about Dutch books, because I can't find directly examples of this kind of identity problem in Dutch or Flemish books.
His name was Moshe, and he knew nothing that he comes from Jewish family.
Even with the name Moshe.
Very very
Yeah. And orphanage, but he was just by accident in this orphanage of Janusz Korczak, and he didn't want it to be there and so on. But okay, this is a nice book.
But I think it might be an interesting subject for us to research. So split identity, creating a double gamer who is non-Jewish and supposed to save the child from all troubles, so if you pretend you are not a Jew. So I think it might be an interesting subject to add to the list. I mean, at least I would suggest that, because this identity crisis, you were talking about adopted children and after the war identity crisis, but identity crisis in the writings while the child is prosecuted as a Jew and the desire not to be one while surviving the war and what happened after. So, I mean, I think it might be an interesting topic to look at.
Okay. Go on. We have only 20 minutes to the finish of our discussion on literature for children and young adults.
Okay, but I think we talk about everything for now.
About everything? Okay. Okay, great.